Good day once again, ladies and gentlemen. Right, for those of you that are doing technical maths, once again we are looking at complex numbers, and this time we're looking at multiplication of complex numbers. So if you haven't watched our previous lesson, please jump on there where I introduce complex numbers and how we deal with them. I start by the numbering system, but if you've watched that lesson, we are going to continue and look at multiplication. And please tell everybody that's doing technical maths, even AP maths, that we are doing complex numbers. Favorite uncle is doing the things that he's known for. All right, let's jump into it, and please click on that subscribe button if you can, right? And let's get into the lesson. Right, now, let's talk again and revisit when we look at complex numbers, right? So suppose that we've got z, we say z is equals to a plus bi. Now I want you to note in this case, a complex number is made out of two parts. We said firstly it's the real part, okay? And we've got in this case the complex part. Now, as I said, if you haven't watched the previous lesson, please go and familiarize yourself with what the I stands for, right? We know that that is the square root of -1. Right, so if I've got, let's say, any complex number, z is equal to 12 plus 3i. So we say that the real part of the complex number z is equal to 12, and the imaginary part of the complex number z is equal to, now we only look at the coefficient, so in this case that would be a positive 3. Okay, right, now I want us to go into the multiplication of these, right? So whenever we've got a complex number, right, we are going to use, or when it comes to multiplication, we're going to use the rules of multiplication as we know them in mathematics. Now, let's take an example, for instance, right? So if I take an example and I say to you, write down. So I want us to rewrite the following. Okay. The following in the form a plus bi. Right, so I want us to write it in that form. Okay, so let's take 5 minus 3i all squared. Now, that is a complex number. We've squared it in this case. So what do? We are going to multiply as we normally do when we've got brackets. Now, in this case, what happens? Right, so we know that if I've got a minus b all squared, what does this become? It becomes a minus b into a minus b. And so we're going to use our FOIL method first, right? And we're going to say outer. So that's first, so that's a times a, that's a squared. Then we look at the outer terms, a times b, that's ab. Okay, minus ab, that is. And negative b times a, again, that becomes negative ab, right? That's inner. And in this case, we end up with just the last terms. So minus b times minus b gives us plus b squared. So you end up with a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Okay, right. So that's how we're going to approach it. Now, I want to quickly just show you a quick method that I sometimes use when we are dealing with these, right? What you simply do when you're squaring an entire bracket, what I do is that I take first the square of the first term. So that will be a squared, a times a, that's a squared. And I take the square of the last term, minus b times minus b, that's going to be plus b squared. And so for the middle term, I multiply the two terms together, a times negative b, that's negative ab, right? And you multiply by 2. So please don't forget to multiply by 2. So that's negative 2ab, right? It always helps for you to be able to work things out much quicker, right? So let's have a look at this. So we can use, a long method. So we can say this becomes 5 minus 3i. That's 5 minus 3i, right? So FOIL method, that's 5 times 5, that's 25. Okay, and we said, okay, outer. So we started with firstly the first ones. 5 times 5, that's 25. 5 times negative 3, that's negative 15i. That's again inner. That's negative 3 times 5. That's again negative 15i. And finally, we've got plus 9. Negative 3 times negative 3, that's 9i squared. Right, to simplify this, we're going to have 25 minus 15i minus 15i gives us minus 30i. And that's plus 9 times. Now remember, I squared, we know that I squared is equal to negative 1. So that's going to be negative 1. And so that's going to be 25 minus 9 minus 30i. Right, and 25 minus 9 gives us 16. That's minus 30i. I want you to note in this case, what do we have? We've got a real part, 16, and we've got an imaginary part, right? So the real part of this, okay, let's call that Z, is 16, and the imaginary part of it is negative 30. Okay, right. Now, if we were going to follow that wonderful method that I just showed you right now of how to do this quick, fast, and in a hurry, right? What are we going to do? I said, firstly, we square we square what we've got. So that's 5 times 5, which is 25. That's negative 3i times negative 3i, right? Or that's negative 3i squared. That's going to be plus 9i squared. Please don't forget the square there, right? And then for the for the middle term, that's 5 times negative 3i. That's negative 15i multiplied by 2. That will give us negative 30i. Okay, so that's how you are going to work it out and see. This is how we got 25 minus 30i. That's minus 9 because I squared is negative 1, and we end up with 16 minus 30i. All right, so this is how we're going to multiply brackets together. So in this case, suppose that we were given something else. That's 3 plus 2i into 3 minus 2i. And I'd like for you to try and do this on your own, okay? And you can watch my solution here after. All right, so pause the video and please work out the solution. All right, and hopefully you have paused the video, right? So how are we going to work through this one together? Right, so firstly, I'm going to look at these two, right? So remember, the BODMAS rule says I must always start with the brackets, right? So I'm going to start with my brackets. So I've got 3 multiplied by 3, that gives us 9, okay? And we look at, in this case, you've got 3 times negative 2i, that gives us minus 6i. We go to the inner, we've got 2i times 3, that's positive 6i. And we go for the last one, which is the ones that are the last. So that's going to be minus 4i squared. Okay, right, minus. Now let's have a look at what we've got over there. I'm going to say, well, that's I squared times I to the exponent 4. And negative multiplied by negative gives me a positive. So that's I squared times 1, which will give me I squared. Right, let's simplify as much as we possibly can. Right, so this guy and that guy cancel each other out. Okay, so I've got 9 minus 4 times. Now, I squared, remember, is negative 1. Okay, minus, in this case, I've got I squared, again, negative 1. I raised to the exponent of 4, right? Remember, that's going to be positive 1. I showed you that in the last video, right? Any multiple of 4 will always give us positive 1. Plus I squared, again, this is negative 1. So let's try and simplify this as far as we possibly can. Right, so we've got 9 plus 4. That's going to be 13. Okay. In fact, let me just take it one step at a time. So that's 9. Negative times a negative 1. That's going to be a positive. So 4 times 1 is 4. Right? Negative times negative, that's positive, times a positive 1. So that will be plus 1. Okay, positive times a negative, that will be negative. So those two cancel each other out. 9 plus 4 gives us 13. So what can we say? The real part of this is 13, and the imaginary part is 0. Okay, so if you wanted to write it down as a complex number, it means that this would be 13 plus 0i. Okay, that is what it would look like. So please keep in mind, ladies and gents, we still treat it as when we are multiplying, any polynomial, right? Whenever we are multiplying any polynomial, in this case, this is what we're going to use, the BODMAS rule. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to take a couple of exercises, and I'm going to take some exercises and I'm going to leave you with some work. All right. Okay, let's go for it. I want you to try them on your own. Okay, so let's take 2 times 3 minus 2i. Right, I'm sure many of you can already see what that would be. So we've got 3 plus 2i. B, that is. And I want us to look at 1. All right, and I want us to take one last one. All right, now let's quickly have a look at it. How are we going to look at the following exercises, right? So what are we meant to do? I want us to write the following in the form, so express in the form, okay, A plus BI. Right, let's start with A, right? Please start it on your own first and then C. In fact, sorry, I made a mistake there. This was supposed to be 2i, not just 2. Okay, that's 2i. All right, let's go for it. Okay, I'm hoping that you'll pause the video first and, just answer the questions, and then you can look at my solutions. All right, now let's go for it. So this is 2i into 3 minus 2i. Okay, let's quickly have a look at it. So what do we get in this case? We've got 2i times 3. That's 6i. and you've got 2i times negative 2i. That will give me negative 4i squared. Right, so I've got 6i minus 4 times I squared is negative 1. And so that would give me 6i plus 4, or you can say 4 plus 6i. That is what it would look like. Okay, let's go for B quickly. So we've got 4 plus 2i, 4 minus 2i. I'm sure many of you can already recognize this. Now, ladies and gents, whenever you have brackets that look exactly the same, that are multiplying each other, and the sign inside is different, we usually call this the difference of squares, right? So not only is it important for you to know how to work it out, but it's also important for you to know how to factorize when you are seeing the difference of squares, right? So that is, in this case, we've got 4 multiplied by 4. That will give me 16, right? But I'm going to show you the quicker way to this, okay? And you've got 4, right? So we started with 4 times 4. Then we're saying 4 multiplied by negative 2i. That's negative 8i. That's 2i times 4. That's 8i. And 2i times negative 2i. That will give me minus 4i squared. Okay, right. I want you to note, you see that the middle terms actually cancel each other out, right? So what are you left with? With the squares, the difference of the squares of the two numbers. So I've got 16 minus 4. I squared is negative 1. Okay, so I've got 16 minus 4 times 1, negative 4 times negative 1. That will give us negative 4. And so that will give us 20. Okay, and I want you to please note, in this case, it means that our imaginary component is actually 0. All right, so that is how you do it. But quickly, before I continue, I want us to be able to, in future, apply the difference of squares. Whenever you've got two brackets that are exactly the same, what did we say? We said these can be the difference of squares that are exactly the same and with different signs. That is, I've got exactly the same thing inside, but I've got different signs. So what will this be? So it means all I'm going to do is take the square of the outer, of the first terms rather, 4 times 4, that's 16, multiplied by the square of the last, so that's minus 4i squared. And so that's where we said 16 minus 4 into negative 1, and that is how we got 20. So please be able to recognize the difference of squares very quickly, okay? Because that's a mathematical hack that will help you in the future. All right, let's go to the next one. Now looking at C, we said this is going to be 3 plus 2i all squared. Right, I did say that when you've got a bracket that is squared, you can expand that bracket or simply use my method. We can say this is the first term, right? 3 squared, that's 9. Okay, and the last term, so that's plus 4i squared. And then we can look at the 2, 3 times 2, that's plus 6i. And in this case, that's what, sorry about that. We said 3 times 2 for the middle term, right? That's 6 multiplied by 2. That will give us 12i. Okay, right. Otherwise, what you could have done is just to expand it. You'll see I'll have 3 plus 2i. I'll have 3 plus 2i. And so what happens in that case? Right, let me switch this guy off again. Right, so what do we end up having? Right, exactly our FOIL method. So 3 times 3, that's going to be 9. And we've got 3 times positive 2, that's 6i, another 6i, and 2i times 2i, that will be 4i squared. And you end up with exactly this if you add the two like terms together, right? But please remember that you can apply that method of multiplying inside the two brackets, okay? Right, so now let's go for it. So we've got 9 plus 12i plus 4 times I squared is negative 1. And so I've got 9. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. So 9 minus 4 plus 12i. And so what this will give me is 5 plus 12i. And so remember our real component, that's going to be whatever our complex number is, that's equal to 5. And our imaginary component is equal to 12. All right, ladies and gents, quickly let's go for the next one. Let's see. So I've got 1 minus 3i squared. I'm certain that you guys are going to get this one right. So 1 squared, that's 1. 1 times negative 3, right? That will give us negative 3. And finally, what we are going to do is we are just simply going to say that's negative 6i, okay? Remember we said 1 times negative 3i times 2. And finally, that's plus 9i squared. Please don't forget that 3i times 3i, 3 times 3 is 9 and not 6. That's a very common mistake that we would sometimes make. Right, so that's 1 minus 6i plus 9 times I squared. I'm sure by now you remember that's negative 1. So 9 times negative 1, that's negative 9. Okay, and you've got 1 minus 9 minus 6i. And so that would give you negative 8 minus 6i. All right, ladies and gents, and that is how the cookie crumbles. The real part is negative 8 and the imaginary part is negative 6. And finally, ladies and gents, before I give you the work that I'd like for you to do, okay, let's go for it. We've got 2 plus 4i and you've got 3 minus 2i. Now, in this case, there's no hack. We just have to do everything in full, right? So that's 2 multiplied by 3, which is 6. That's 2 times negative 2. That's negative 4i. That's 4 times 3i. That's 4i times 3. That's going to be 12i. And finally, you've got 4i times negative 2i. That's going to be negative 8i squared. Okay, right. And so what do we have? So we've got 6 minus 4i plus 12, right? So that will give us plus 8i. Plus 8i. Right, 12 minus 4 gives us 8. And this is minus 8 into negative 1. Okay, right, remember I squared is negative 1. And so finally, ladies and gents, you've got 6. Right, negative 8 times negative 1. That will give us positive 8 plus 8i. And so 8 plus 6, this will give us 14. Okay, and plus 8i. All right, awesome stuff, ladies and gents. That's the real part and that's the imaginary part of this. Now, I want you to take the following exercise, all right? And as you would know, right, all the exercises, all the solutions to the exercises, we will put them on our memberships tab. So for those of you who do want to see the solutions, you're more than welcome to go and become a member of the channel. All right, so for our exercise, the first one, okay, I'm going to take, right, so that's 2i minus 3 square cubed. Let's open it up a bit. Okay, and let's take I into 2i 2 minus 3i minus 5 into I to the 6, and almost done. Let's give a all right, and all right, and ladies and gents, that is really how the cookie crumbles. Maybe I can just add one last one. Let's see. So I've already given you this. Okay. Yeah. All right, let me actually just give you a slightly different one for this. Maybe let's remove that. Okay, and I've given you 4 plus 3i. That's I squared, I6. And I have, oh yeah, there's just one last one that I did not give you. Okay, that's 2 minus 3i. And ladies and gents, this is very important for practicing, right? Very important for you to familiarize yourself with how to solve these. As I said, all the solutions to these exercises you will be able to get if you're a member, okay, of the channel. And I will show you how to walk through these ones. But for now, I'll see you guys next time. I hope you've understood. Shap shap.